San Francisco, mid-1970s. The city was alive at night. Fog rolled in from the bay, swallowing streetlights whole. Neon signs flickered along Market Street. Music leaked from bars where freedom felt louder than fear, especially in the Castro, where a community long pushed into the shadows was finally learning how to live openly. But someone was watching. Between 1974 and 1975, men began to disappear. Gay men, young men, men who trusted easily. They met him in bars, on street corners, in quiet conversations that felt harmless. He was charming, intelligent, well-spoken, someone who seemed to understand them. He carried a pen, and sometimes a sketch pad. Survivors would later tell police the same unsettling detail. Before the attack, he asked to draw them. A quick sketch, a face captured in lines, a moment of intimacy disguised as art. Then the knife came out. At least 14 men were stabbed. Some survived, bleeding, terrified, alive enough to describe him. Others didn't. Their bodies were found in alleys, parks, near the ocean, always stabbed, always alone, and always within the same hidden world the city pretended not to see. Police called him the Doodler. The name sounded almost harmless. The crimes were not. The investigation moved slowly, not because there were no witnesses, but because many refused to speak. The victims were men living double lives, men with careers, families, reputations that could collapse under exposure. Coming forward meant risking everything. So they stayed silent. And the killer learned something terrifying. He was protected by shame. San Francisco had seen killers before, but this one didn't hide in darkness. He blended in. He talked. He laughed. He drew faces in ink, then erased lives in blood. And as the fog closed in each night, one question lingered. How do you catch a man everyone recognizes, but no one dares to name? The first survivor broke the pattern. Staggering out of the darkness, bleeding from multiple stab wounds, he collapsed into the street and lived long enough to talk. His description was calm, precise, almost clinical. A black man, well-dressed, late 20s or early 30s, soft-spoken, intelligent, and most unsettling of all, familiar. Soon others came forward, men who had met him in bars, men who had talked for hours, men who remembered the sketch. Each account matched. The Doodler didn't rush. He listened. He smiled. He asked questions about art, about life, about loneliness. He made his victims feel seen. Then, when they were alone, he attacked. Police finally had something rare in a serial case: living witnesses. Composite sketches were drawn, not by one man, but several survivors working independently. The result was chilling. The same face. Investigators believed they were close. The Doodler was known in the Castro. He had a name whispered in bars. Some victims recognized him instantly when shown the sketch. But no one would sign a statement. No one would testify. The reason was simple and devastating. Many of the survivors were professionals, doctors, lawyers, executives. Publicly identifying their attacker meant publicly identifying themselves. In 1970s America, that could destroy lives. So they chose silence, and the case stalled. Police identified a strong suspect. He lived in the area. He fit every description. He had a history of violence. But without testimony, there was no arrest, no warrant, no trial. The killings slowed, then stopped, not because the case was solved, but because the man they called the Doodler simply vanished from the streets, moved on, changed routines, or learned he was being watched. San Francisco was left with an open file and a bitter truth. They had the face of the killer. They had his victims. They had survivors who knew his name. And still, they couldn't stop him. By 1975, the case had become an open secret. In certain bars, the name was known, not spoken loudly, but understood. A man who sketched, a man who smiled too easily, a man people quietly warned each other about. And yet, he walked free. Detectives pushed harder. They revisited survivors again and again, hoping time had softened fear, hoping outrage had grown stronger than shame. Some men almost agreed. Then they stopped. Because testifying meant standing in open court and answering questions no one wanted to ask in 1970s America. How did you meet him? Why were you alone together? Why were you there at all? Justice came with a cost they weren't ready to pay. Behind closed doors, investigators knew the truth. This was one of the rare cases where silence, not lack of evidence, protected a serial attacker. The Doodler exploited more than trust. He exploited a system that punished victims twice. The suspect remained under surveillance for a time. Officers noted his movements, his habits, his presence in familiar places. Then funding dried up. Priorities shifted. Other crimes demanded attention. The city moved on. He did too. Years passed. New murders elsewhere caught headlines. New fears replaced old ones. The faces of the victims faded from the front pages. But the case file never closed. It sat in a drawer thick with sketches, survivor statements, and unanswered questions. A case solved in theory, but never in law. For San Francisco's LGBTQ+ community, the damage lingered. Trust fractured. Fear learned how to dress itself as caution. And the lesson settled in quietly. Visibility could be dangerous. The Doodler never claimed credit, never taunted police, never wrote letters, never left messages behind. He didn't need notoriety. He needed anonymity. And in a city built on freedom, anonymity proved to be his greatest shield. Decades passed. Quietly. San Francisco changed its face. The Castro became a symbol of pride rather than secrecy. Laws shifted. Voices that had once been forced underground grew louder, stronger, unafraid. But the Doodler case remained frozen in the past. By the 1990s, detectives revisiting the files felt a familiar frustration. The evidence was still there. The sketches were still sharp. The survivor statements were still detailed. What was missing had always been the same thing: someone willing to stand up in court. Cold case units re-examined the murders with modern eyes. They confirmed what earlier investigators had suspected. The attacks followed a consistent pattern. The suspect had a strong familiarity with the city. The victims were targeted, not random. This wasn't chaos. It was controlled violence. DNA offered hope, briefly. But most of the evidence had been degraded by time, poor preservation, or simply never collected with future technology in mind. In the 1970s, no one imagined forensic tools that could read decades-old bloodstains. Opportunities had been lost forever. Then, in quiet interviews, something changed. Survivors, older now, safer now, began speaking more openly. Not always on record, not always by name, but enough to confirm a chilling reality. Many of them had known exactly who attacked them. They had seen him again after surviving. In bars, on sidewalks, living his life. And he knew they recognized him. One former investigator would later admit, "We didn't fail because we didn't know. We failed because the system gave victims no safe way to tell the truth." The suspect aged. If he was still alive, he was now an old man, carrying secrets no courtroom had ever forced him to share. And the families of the victims were left with a grief that never found resolution. The Doodler murders were never officially closed. They became a case study in silence. Not the silence of missing clues, but the silence of fear, stigma, and a society not yet ready to protect its own. The Doodler was never arrested. No trial, no conviction, no confession. Just a name given to a man who used art as a weapon and silence as his escape. Today, the case stands as one of San Francisco's most haunting unsolved crimes. Not because investigators lacked intelligence, not because evidence didn't exist, but because fear spoke louder than justice. The sketches remain. A face drawn again and again by men who survived him, a face that even now could still be recognized by someone who once knew him, a face that never stood in front of a jury. The victims were never given closure. Some survived the attack, but not the aftermath. Others died quietly, their names slowly fading from public memory. The city remembers the era, but the killer passed through it untouched. The Doodler murders force an uncomfortable question. How many crimes go unsolved not because they're impossible, but because telling the truth is too dangerous? This case wasn't just about violence. It was about stigma, about invisibility, about a justice system that required victims to sacrifice themselves to be believed. Some killers hide in shadows. The Doodler hid in plain sight. And until someone speaks the name they once whispered in fear, this case will remain what it has always been. Solved by many, proven by none, closed by no one.